Hi everyone, I am Mahammad Mammadov, a research fellow at Topchubashov Center. Today we continue our TopTalk video series on geopolitical developments in wider Eurasian region. And in this episode, we will discuss international relations of Central Asian countries against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine. As we see, Central Asia has so far been one of the regions where Russia's loss of influence, let's say, being most evident. On the one hand, some Central Asian countries are openly trying to diversify their international linkages to alternative power pools. On the other hand, some major powers have stepped up efforts to fill the power vacuum left by Russia's blunder in Ukraine. So these and other issues I'll discuss with my guest, Temur Umarov. Temur is a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and his research mainly covers domestic and foreign policies of Central Asian countries. Temur, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and joining our program.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with a question, a general one. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have been observing Russian influence waning in its so-called near broad. So my question is how Central Asian republics have been reacting to this significant change in the regional distribution of power, or what kinds of change we see in their alignment behavior toward Russia?
So the reaction of Central Asian states in this Russia's full-scale reinvasion of Ukraine has been very different. I think that it also has a lot to do with differences that we have among Central Asian countries, because mostly people from the outside think that Central Asia is just one region that is very homogeneous and everything is the same, but it's not. And when we talk about the reaction towards the war in Ukraine, it was obvious how they acted differently. So, of course, when we think about it in the first place, Kazakhstan comes to mind because Kazakhstan so far has been the most, active and sending clear messages towards their reaction and how they see the current situation. In the first place, I should say, Kazakhstan openly said that they're not gonna, support new so-called republics in Lugansk, Donetsk, and other parts of Ukraine that Russia right now claims to be the part of the Russian Federation. Other than that, Kazakhstan's authorities on different levels, from the very high level represented by the President Tokayev, have also been open about Kazakhstan's position towards the sanctions. It was said that Kazakhstan will follow international sanctions against Russian economy because this is happening under the law and they cannot break international law. So to this point, Kazakhstan has been the most kind of vocal in official from the official point of view. Also, Uzbekistan has also made an announcement that it does not welcome solving problems with the war as an instrument, and also echoed the statement that Uzbekistan is not going to recognize Lugansk or Donetsk or any other parts of Ukraine being independent or part of Russia whatsoever. But when we talk about Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, these three countries have not been so clear in their messaging towards what's going on in Ukraine. And I think that the main reason behind that is the level of dependency that different countries in Central Asia have in regards with Russia. Of course, all Central Asian countries depend on Russia, and this is something that is inherited from the Soviet times and even maybe earlier. All of the, if we just take a look at the economies, at the trade routes, at the logistics infrastructure, we will see that even today, the majority of the ties, economic ties that Central Asia has, are going through the north, through Russia. And this is something that Central Asia has been trying to change in the last 3 decades. And in some cases, there were obvious steps towards becoming a more connected to other parts of the world apart from Russia, especially when we talk about the eastern border with China. Right now we see that Central Asia has pipelines to China, has railways that connects the region to China. Also, when we talk about the western border, when we talk about the middle corridor, the importance of this corridor is also growing. But still, if we compare statistically all of the alternatives that Central Asia has, still the dominant part, the dominant chunk is occupied by Russia. But every single crisis that Russia has with the world, with the West, and every single crisis that makes Russia more and more isolated kind of adds fuel to the process of diversifying of the ties in Central Asia. And I think what is going on right now is something that Central Asia and actually the world in this part of the world have never seen before, at least in the last couple of decades. And the consequences of the war in Ukraine would be also very big. And we still don't know how Central Asia is going to look in a couple of years, let alone, decades.
Yeah, very interesting. And my next question is related to this, what you said about this dependence on Russia on many strategic issues. But yeah, despite all this Russia's weak talks, how you think, what types of leverage and linkages Russia still has in its, like, let's say, geopolitical toolbox that it can use to prevent this centrifugal tendencies in Central Asia?
Yeah, so if you want to look into more detail of the instruments that Russia has to put pressure on Central Asia, I think we should first look at the economies. And here, when we talk about Central Asia, we should understand that 2 countries in Central Asia are the part of Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, which means that there are basically no custom borders between these countries, and there is a free flow of trade and people in this union. It's very, in an ideal world, this would be a very good situation that opens the borders, makes life for labor migrants more and more comfortable, for example, when we talk about Kyrgyzstan. But in the situation of crisis and in the situation when you have tensions between the biggest economy in this union, we see how it kind of hits back. What the union has made so far is that it made economies of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan dependent on Russia, even on the basic importing products, for example, sugar or flour or other basic things that people need here in Central Asia just for living. They mainly come from Russia. If we just take a look at the statistic, we will see that local producers here in Kazakhstan, for example, do not cover the needs of Kazakhstanis in 60%. And these left 40% is covered by imports from Russia. And when Russia stopped exporting sugar, for example, there has been a huge problems here in Kazakhstan with sugar, and inflation on this product has grown till even 100% to a certain point. So first instrument that Russia has is this economic leverage, even on some basic needs. Other than that, there is also dependency in infrastructure. Even if we talk about the trade between Central Asia and, for example, European countries, we should understand that it all comes through Russian territory, and Russia has an instrument to just shut it down.
But there is changes after the sanctions. There is some 40% is diverted, yeah.
Yes, after of course, it's not only that Russia can just shut it down, but also when sanctions work and the logistic companies have to face difficulties with transactions, with I mean, basically war,
safety,
safety, etc. Yes, it also impacts Central Asia. But other than that, again, when we talk about Kazakhstan, for example, the biggest chunk of Kazakhstan's budget comes from oil export, and it goes through pipelines. And the biggest pipeline is Trans-Caspian pipeline that is going through Russian territory again. And moreover, this pipeline in 30% belongs to Russia. So it also has its leverage on stability of economic situation in Kazakhstan. And there has been already 4 incidents when Russia stopped this pipeline from working. Kazakhstan couldn't send oil to its European countries. Apart from economy, we also have security situation. In Central Asia, there are a lot of Russia's security objects, military objects. In Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. In Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, there are Russia's military bases that provide security for the country on the bilateral instrument. And there is also a collective security treaty organization, the Russia-led military alliance, and 3 countries of Central Asia, namely Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, are part of this organization. And above all that, I would say that Russia also has political influence in Central Asia because of the informal ties that the political elites have in Russia and political elites in Central Asia, because of their similarities in their backgrounds. Because if we just take a look at these people who are ruling all of these countries, we'll understand that this is more or less same people with the same background, speaking Russian, knowing each other for long times, and it also has its own power in making negotiations or making decisions.
Yeah, there's I think there are even some theories that argue that, explain Central Asian integration in, like security and economic issues to like this regime security concerns that, for example, some Central Asian countries participate or join CSTO not for, let's say, securing the country's, national interest, but first of all, regime security. So yeah, it's very interesting that after Russia's awakening, how it would influence their calculation in their, approach to CSTO and even Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Yeah, Mike, next question is about labor migrants, because we know that labor migrants and remittances issue is always usually brought up in Russia's talks with Central Asian countries. For example, in, I think, 2021, Uzbekistan's remittances accounted for about 11% of GDP. In the case of Kyrgyzstan, the number was 26, and Tajikistan, it was something like 25, 30, and before it was even up to 40%, a huge dependence on remittances. So After recently, we saw Russia's mobilization campaign included rounding up ethnic minorities, including migrants from Central Asia, to be used as kind of cannon fodder, in Ukraine. And on the other hand, we saw Putin's conscription campaign led to mass exodus of Russian men, let's say, to Central Asian countries. So what do you think? What's the reaction and broad implications for these countries' political-economic stability?
Yes, for now have been some reports that show that even migrants from Central Asia that do not obtain Russian passport also are being drafted. At least there are attempts from different governmental organizations to do that. It doesn't really work very well, but there are several reports that show that some citizens from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and from Kyrgyzstan have been seen in Ukraine as drivers or to be overall on the Russian side participating in this war. Other than that, I'm not here talking about those who decided to take second citizenship and have Russian passports. Of course, they are the first one who will fall under this threat. But even people who are not are being welcomed in different migration centers in Russia, in Moscow, to go to the war, to participate on the Russian side, and have some bonuses in getting citizenship very early. But I mean, if before the war, Russian citizenship looked like something that would help you in the future, will open some doors to the other countries, because Russian passport is stronger than any other Central Asian passports. But right now, I think the situation is changing. Russian passport doesn't look as good as it used to be, and not many Central Asians really want to get one. But when we talk about labor migration, we should understand that for now, there hasn't been a big change in this situation. Again, this is actually one of the instruments that Russia has on Central Asian countries that I didn't mention before, but it is a pretty big dependency from Central Asian countries. And because of that, because Russian economy is still, it doesn't look like it's collapsing, and it doesn't look like there are no jobs left in Russia. And that is why we see that in the first 6 months of 2022, there has been a record high number of labor migrants going to Russia. In the last 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, and the Russian currency that is becoming magically stronger and stronger is also helping to this process. But to understand how it will change in the future, I think there should be some kind of collaboration between Central Asia watchers and experts on Russian economy, because everything depends right now on Russian economy and on Russian labor market. If there will be shortages in jobs in the spheres that migrants are concentrated the most, construction, services, trade, transportation, taxis, we will see that for example, if in upcoming year there will be no many new buildings built in different cities of Russia, there will be no need for additional labor force. And after that, we will see the decline in dependency from labor migration from Central Asia. But if it doesn't happen, I don't think that we will see huge change in this direction, because for now, I don't see that Central Asian society really thinks that there are other options other than Russia. Even if Russia looks more and more unpredictable and even risky.
Yeah, back to this power vacuum in Central Asia. The EU seems to be invested in the idea of bolstering its economic presence in the region, of course, after these events. And on October 27, we saw Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, hosted the first EU Central Asia leaders meeting. And so what do you think Brussels' game is for Central Asia in post-February 24 period?
So the summit with Sharm el-Sheikh it was held in Astana is, of course, a sign that European Union cares about Central Asia, remembers that there is this region that they have to pay attention to, that this region has a lot of problems, and there is still Afghanistan on the border that also is on the brink of humanitarian disaster. Of course, other crises have taken away the attention of international society, but still there is a need for additional attention from European Union. But I don't think that for now we see the big change in the priorities of European Union. It seems that European Union itself is in the middle of a crisis, that hasn't been observed for the last couple of, years, maybe decades. And it doesn't look like there is enough energy and capacity in European Union to spend much time on providing Central Asia with additional tangible alternative, at least in the short term. But of course, there are certain niches that can be taken by the West in Central Asia, and those niches are mainly concentrated on the spheres that are not taken care of by other actors. For example, when we talk about alternative energy or sustainable economy, this is something that really is in the priority list of the European Union, but not as much in the priority of Central Asia and other countries in this region. Or if we talk about human rights, right, and democratization and building institutions, this is also something that European Union mainly focuses on, and not something that other countries would be ready to do in Central Asia. But other than that, I don't, to be honest, see the creation of stronger ties between these two regions, at least for now.
Yeah, on November 18, I think EU and Central Asian leaders are planning a sustainable connectivity conference to be held in Samarkand. And yeah, and Charles Michel openly said that there they will discuss the prospects of strengthening the capacity of the middle corridor. Do you believe that under these new conditions that sanctions on Russia provided, middle corridor countries in partnership with China and EU can turn the corridor into a viable alternative to the northern corridor passing through Russian territory?
I think if what is going on right now with the war and with Russia becoming more and more isolated, it definitely would become a reality. I'm not talking about short term. It's just impossible because everything has to be financed very well. And when we talk about logistics, it's not sphere that is changing rapidly in matter of years. There should be maybe in 5 years we will see some changes, but we should talk about decades here. Yeah, I definitely see that if Russia continues what it's doing, and if we will be living in a situation when the Russian political regime would continue to stay in power, and we won't see any huge changes in the leadership in Moscow. I think middle corridor would become a very good alternative because I think the main reason behind changing this, behind all big structural changes in the way trade is going, I think it's easy as that is just money. And if businesses and countries would understand that it has become, the best way of sending trade to Europe or connecting China to Europe through this way, we will see the huge development in this direction. But if not, there can be so many scenarios right now with the future of Russia. Everything that I'm talking about is mostly speculations, but still, many things are right now depend on the future of the war and how long it's going to take to stabilize the situation, and etc. etc. Also, I think that there already is huge attention and huge hopes for the middle corridor, because the world understands that depending on only one route through very unpredictable country is not sustainable. So there should be at least two kind of working scenarios or working plans for the future.
Yeah, exactly. So when we discuss the geopolitics of Central Asia, of course, another important figure is China. And how you think China's support or lack of support to Russia in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine will affect its geopolitical posturing in Central Asia?
Good question. I think that China right now deliberately doesn't want to sound clear on its position towards the war in Ukraine. We hear different, sometimes very different announcements from Beijing. On the one hand, Beijing is talking about the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty, and on the other hand, they're talking about Russia's understanding of Russia's interests, security interests in Europe, and understanding of the this big kind of confrontation between the West and the need to fight the US hegemony and stuff like that. But when we talk about Central Asia, I think even after the war, we still underestimate the level of cooperation that exists there between Moscow and Beijing. It was announced even before the war that China and Russia would cooperate more in neighboring regions, which is obviously Central Asia. But I think when the war has started, we will see even more attention to this region from both sides. And we will see more cooperation between these two countries in the region. First of all, this is not because there are two big countries that decide the future for Central Asia. No, it's not. First of all, it's because Central Asia wants it. The ideal picture for Central Asia is to have all countries that are interested in the region come together and cooperate. And the catastrophic image for Central Asia is to have all of those countries coming and conflicting on their territory and fighting. This is not something that Central Asia wants, and that is why they want to have predictable partners that will be in Central Asia cooperating. Of course, it sounds like China and Russia would decide what it's better and it's not better for Central Asia, but I don't mean it. I think that everything that was happening in Central Asia between these countries and China, it also for now doesn't look like a threat from Moscow's point of view. They've seen that all of the security concerns that China has, all of the economic ties that China creates, it's something inevitable and that Russia cannot stop, and that is why they have to kind of maximize the advantages that they would get from these status quo. What Russia has been doing is also focusing on those spheres where China is still doesn't have enough instruments to kind of fill in this gaps in Central Asia. And I think that from the moment when it became obvious that the war in Ukraine is going to be long and that it affects Russia's image in international sphere, Moscow has decided to focus on those regions where it seems to be strong. And Central Asia comes to mind in the first place, and we've seen huge attention from Moscow to this region. We see that Putin has visited all of the countries of Central Asia except for Kyrgyzstan since the war has started. We've seen a lot of summits that Putin has taken part in. We also see kind of different initiatives that Moscow tries to kind of present to a Central Asian country. And we also see that there is, obvious cooperation happening between Moscow and Beijing. During the Vostok military drills, there have been scenarios where Chinese and Russian military troops were working on potential threat on the border between Afghanistan and Central Asia. There have been talks about cooperating on terrorism and extremism issues when it comes to the neighboring region. So what has changed with the war in the last several years is that Russia and China no longer kind of hide that they cooperate on Central Asia. And I think in the future we will see this trend becoming more and more obvious. So I don't think that Russia's weakening position right now would lead to China feeling Russia's position in Central Asia. I think that Russia would be ready to present more to China, to maybe even give away some of its instruments that it has, or to let China copy the instruments that Russia has in Central Asia, because still for Russia, #1 priority in its foreign policy is China. And to have at least some of the leverage above China, it has to present something, and this something might be knowledge that Russia has about Central Asia.
Yeah, lastly, I would like to ask you about the growing role of another regional major power, Turkey, in South Caucasus and Central Asia, in both economic and military terms. How is it perceived by Central Asian countries, China and Russia?
Yeah, we see that South Caucasus and Turkey have become much more visible in Central Asia in the last. I wouldn't say that it started from the war, but still, it started even earlier. I would even say that maybe from 2016, when we saw the transit of power in Uzbekistan, and Uzbekistan has been this kind of main vehicle of openness, of a kind of new openness of Central Asia and more integration in Central Asia itself and between Central Asia and other parts of the world. So from that point, we saw much more attention from Central Asia to South Caucasus and vice versa, and the same with Turkey. We've seen that the organization of Turkic countries has recently become kind of the second wave of life of this organization. We see that different leaders meet bilaterally and multilaterally under the umbrella of Turkic States Organization. And we also see some new changes happening between Central Asia in regards with Turkey, and especially, I would say, Azerbaijan. For example, we saw the visit of Recep Erdogan to Central Asia, to SCO summit as a member, as an observer of the organization. And we also saw that Tokayev visited Turkey and signed an impressive agreement. And one of the points in this agreement was to share intelligence information. And this is the first time the country that is part of Russia-led military alliance, CSTO, has signed this kind of agreement with a NATO member. So this is pretty huge, I would say. And I also see differences that are happening between, for example, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan. Leaders are meeting much more often than we used to before. And there is an attempt to create more economic ties between these countries. Because it seems that for the last 3 decades, after the the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were any strong connections between another Turkic country, Azerbaijan, with Central Asian Turkic countries. And this is something that Mirziyoyev and Tokayev want to change, because they see the potential interest, especially in the business sphere, in the energy sector and financial sector that exist between the countries, and we see those synergies. And of course, the importance of Azerbaijan as a country that has power over the middle corridor is also growing. What's I would say, if there is any whatsoever bonuses that Central Asia is getting from the current geopolitical crisis, is that it becomes more and more connected to other countries in the region that it didn't pay enough attention to before that.
Dear Temur, thank you very much for very insightful comments and discussion, and I hope we'll see you again in our program in the nearest possible future.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.